Hello and welcome to another HanDrinksSolo wine intro video. And today we are discussing the Trizanne TSW main range Syrah from Swartland. Now, for those of you who have been in the club for a year or more, you may remember Trizanne Barnard as the surfy, bungee jumping, Wim Hof inspired, ice bath taking wildcat, who also has made an insane number of trophy winning wines. It's probably also worth mentioning that the last time I did a range tasting of her Elim wines set up against some of my winemaking heroes, she absolutely destroyed the competition on the table, bottle by bottle, and forced me to re-examine everything I thought to be true about my little world of South African wine. But we are not exploring her Elim wines today. We are in fact exploring her Swartland Syrah, the TSW, which, as I said, is from the Swartland, grown in schist soils from vines that are roughly 20 years old. Now, as you might have been able to guess by looking at the ABV figure of 13%, this is not a big, heavy, rich Shiraz or Syrah. But despite what the kind of not so pleasant, cheap screw cap would have you believe, this is also not a poolside quaffing wine. It's almost as if when Trizanne was trying to deliver a wine with a little more mass appeal that was perhaps somewhat less esoteric than some of her other wines, she just ended up supremely over-delivering on the genre. And what we have in the glass is actually a light-footed Syrah that is enormously complex and super classy.
Now enough talking, let's drink.
So I think what I love about this up front is that it is just so classic Shiraz or Syrah, in that you've got your blackcurrant fruit, a little bit of red fruit perhaps in there as well, but then over the top, in fact probably more obvious, is black pepper, a kind of dynamic, deeper clove spice. I think Trizanne actually calls it cardamom herself. And then behind it all, there's also a slight hint of kind of stalky greenness, which is really quite lovely. It's kind of I would describe it as a herbal rocket influence, which manages to be spicy and herby all at the same time. So the nose really is quite giving. Let's take a sip and see what the palate has. As suspected, it really is quite light-footed, and it does dance on the palate quite beautifully. Of course, we have to acknowledge that this is not the big, rich, ripe, almost chocolatey, velvety style of Shiraz that you might be used to. It is more about expressing some brightness and some freshness. But then what elevates it to the next level is the fact that those spice notes that we smelt on the aromas all of a sudden come back and intermingle with what started out as, I guess, fairly straightforward primary components. You have this beautiful mix of blackberry fruit, a little bit of cherry, and then the cardamom and the pepper and the rocket leaf woven through that. And finally, you may have noticed that a couple of times earlier in the video, I used the term Syrah and Shiraz interchangeably. Now, I did that because science has taught us that they are, in fact, genetically identical. They are the same grape. Syrah and Shiraz have no difference whatsoever. But once the wine fraternity kind of got over the fact that we'd been duped for decades into believing that they were different grapes, we kind of settled down and realized that the stylistic differences around the world really do warrant us retaining these two terms, Shiraz and Syrah. In France, it is called Syrah almost exclusively, and the same goes for the word Shiraz in Australia. New Zealand, who is right next to Australia, but quite a lot cooler in certain areas, has chosen to use the term Syrah because they want the world to know that they are producing wines far more in the French style than they are in the rich, ripe, layered, velvety, black fruit Australian style. They prefer to see themselves as perhaps a little leaner, more structured, more spice and floral elements, which would be more associated with something like the Northern Rhone. That all makes sense. It seems like everybody has picked a lane and stuck to it. France have their Syrah. New Zealand like to reference France, so they have Syrah. Australia don't want to reference France at all. So everyone has picked a lane and stayed in it, except for South Africa. South Africa, you'll see, uses Shiraz and Syrah absolutely willy-nilly. Now, you could argue that we have absolutely trashed any hope that we have of having either of these terms meaning anything to the consumer, or conversely, you could say that perhaps we have just most profoundly lent into the freedom that comes with understanding that Syrah and Shiraz are in fact the same grape. So what does it matter? But of course it does matter when it comes to communicating to the consumer and enabling the consumer to figure out what is in the bottle by reading what's on the bottle. Various wine authorities around South Africa have done their best to come up with some theories that would explain the differences between the term. One theory might go something along the lines of, if it's a warm region that produces a richer style, then you say Shiraz. whereas cooler style, which might be more structured and more floral and more spicy, less fruity, that would be Syrah. But that doesn't really hold true, especially because half of Constantia uses the word Shiraz. Then you go to the next theory that says if it's really, really entry level, it's going to be Shiraz, it's going to be mass market, it's going to be cheap, it's going to be fruity, no spice, then that's Shiraz. And if it's fancy and kind of aloof and has a black label with gold gilt lettering, then it's earned the right to use the word Syrah. Obviously doesn't hold true. Both rules, in fact, have about as many exceptions as they do supporting examples. I mean, the Shiraz Association of South Africa has kind of completely embraced the chaos. In fact, on their website, they actually have the slogan that says, I say Syrah, you say Shiraz. And I think what they were trying to say is, hey man, be free, say whatever you want. But what it comes across as to a more sensitive wine lover is, well, if you say Syrah, why should I say Shiraz? I mean, am I not cool enough to join you in the Syrah camp? I mean, there's definitely a sense of Gayatri Spivak's othering at work here. As for us here at the HanDrinksSolo wine community, we don't judge at all. You can call it whatever you want. What I would love to hear is your thoughts on this particular wine. So why not leave a review in the section below this video? Or if you're watching it on YouTube, subscribe to the HanDrinksSolo channel so that you can stay up to date with the weekly videos that I publish on South African wine. And finally, if you have any questions about Trizanne Barnard as a winemaker or about the TSW range, you can drop those in the comment section below, and I always make sure to get back to any questions that are asked of me.